Hello, I'm Dr. Harold Koenig, and welcome to our seminar on religion, spirituality, and health. I am very excited to be able to introduce our speaker, Dr. Richard Cox. Dr. Cox is a physician, a clinical rehabilitation psychologist, and a Presbyterian clergyperson. He has been awarded 3 honorary doctorates. He is an adjunct professor at Duke University here in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. And he is also associate faculty at Georgetown University Medical Center, the Pellegrino Center for Clinical BioEthics.
Take a picture of that.
He is also, served on the faculty of Northwestern University Medical School, Rush University Medical School, and is President Emeritus of the Forrest Institute of Professional Psychology. He has been awarded the Presidential Award for Lifetime Practice Achievement, the Jefferson Cup Award, and the Heiser Award by the American Psychological Association. He has served as consultant to the World Health Organization, United Nations, and multiple national and international health, religious, and educational organizations and denominational mission boards. He's the author of 24 books and is an accomplished composer, arranger of classical brass and keyboard publications. Now let me tell you a little bit more about Dr. Cox. He is at the young age of 93 and a half. And if anybody exhibits, is a poster boy for religion, spirituality, and health, it's him. It's him. He has survived 2 episodes within the last year or so of COVID-19. And he has also survived seizures with a blood glucose level of 23, which is incredible. And despite that, he is composing, he is writing books, one of which is the one he's going to talk about today. So, and he has been a colleague of Carl Rogers, I think, right? Right? Mm-hmm. Carl Rogers and other huge names in the field of psychology. These are his buddies, or were, his buddies during those days. So it's with a great pleasure and honor to be able to introduce Dr. Richard Cox to you. So Richard, go ahead and take it away.
Well, thank you, Dr. Koenig. You're gracious and very kind to say those things. I want to thank you for allowing me to do this. When I mentioned to friends that I was going to be doing a Zoom on this topic, I don't have to tell you that they were both pleased and surprised to know that there is a venue which is still interested in this kind of thing. And that, Duke Medical School would have an interest in spirituality. Many people don't know that. And it's very much a privilege of mine to have been associated with you in your department and had the opportunity to supervise some of your residents and the like, and to underline that, it just seems so obvious to me, but it's not to everyone, that nothing exists without spirituality. At the final analysis, the bottom of the formula, it's all spiritual. And someone has said, we are not humans who have spirituality. We are spiritual beings in human bodies. And so the essence of what we're about is spirituality. I thought I'd start, though, by just very briefly telling you a little about why I wrote this book. This book began in the 1950s. I was pastoring at that time in Peoria, Illinois, and doing graduate work. I'd already gotten out of seminary and was doing some master's work at Bradley University, actually. And from that time until this, I have continually been amazed and both dismayed and surprised at what people do with spirituality and how the church and religious people have taken it for granted without actually recognizing the importance of it, the power of it, and utilizing the catechetical and other methods we have for instilling spirituality in our children particularly. But in the 1970s, I wrote a book called The Sacrament of Psychology, in which I felt at that particular time, it was kind of the touchy-feely time in psychology. And at that time, it seemed like so many sermons in churches were going the way of, if you feel good, everything's wonderful, and that we were forsaking values for the idea of like we actually are. So anyway, that book came out and did quite well way back then, but continued to grow in my mind until this last year or two. A young man came to me that was actually a Duke seminary student, just finishing his degree and wanting to spend some time mentoring with an older person. And I agreed to do so. And in the process of it, COVID hit. And so we began to do everything by Zoom. And one day we said to each other, you know, this is interesting, this dialogue we're doing back and forth. Why don't we put this on paper and just put it out as a little book? So we recorded everything we'd done. So it was all recorded. So this book, although we have masked things and disguised and changed names, it is 100% true. What you read in it is absolutely true. It just may have occurred in a different place with a different name, but the actual material is true. And so we decided we'd make it a little more funny and adopt some pen names. And so his mythical name became Hudson. Why, I have no idea, but we landed on the name Hudson, it stuck. So he's Hudson in the book. And then we decided, well, what am I going to be? Well, you see, in the Old Testament, there was somebody that guarded the temple, but they were called temple masters. But much theology that we were dealing with was written in German, and a great deal of the work and the Reformation all centered around that part of the world. And the people that took care of the holy places, some of them were called sextons and other kinds of names, but some were called steeplemeisters. That interpreted into English becomes steeple master. So I became the guardian, the guardian of the truth. So I became the senior mentor as the steeple master. So in this book, I am Steeple. And later, as we became friends, he changed it and we became very good friends. My nickname is Steep. So Steep and Hudson have these discussions. Well, let's move on into the importance of it all. You see, coming from psychology as well as from medicine, I recognize, and I'm sure we all do, that everything we have is really based upon memory. And it goes back to early childhood and probably before that. We are more and more learning that we may have memories even gestational. And so all of this new knowledge as we grow up becomes part of our spiritual heritage and our history. And it's not easy to get rid of. Even though we move through all kinds of reformations in our own life and difficulties, transformations and education that changes our way of thinking, the truth is that what we have as children sticks with us in a way that perhaps we aren't always willing to recognize. But so anyway, in dealing with this, we got to dealing with the Old and New Testament and the fact that how can you understand the message of the New Testament without the history and the knowledge and the memory that comes from all the minds and all of the organizations and behavior, experiences that came out of everything in the Old Testament, particularly back to Abraham. So it became a matter of how we would deal with Abraham. And then into the New Testament, it was obvious that we were going to contrast two wells, the well of Abraham and the well of the woman at the well in the New Testament, Jesus at the well. And this is kind of the basis of where all this comes from. And so as we had our mentoring sessions, it was kind of as if Abraham is talking to a young man, and the young man is listening to the old man and relating what is the message of the New Testament to that which undergirds it from the Old Testament. And recognizing that it seems like, in many of our Protestant churches at least, that many have pretty much forsaken the Old Testament. They've kind of decided that it's two books, and the Old Testament is, in truth, quote, old, and therefore the New Testament is the new. But unfortunately, that isn't the case. It's really one book, it's one message, it's said in different ways, it's couched in different experiences, but it's the same message. And so this book is a book basically on the relationship between belief and behavior. And that, of course, took me back to my moorings in psychology and neurology and psychiatry, in that it is no lack of truth when one says that as one thinks, he or she becomes. Our minds determine what we will do. And then in a reciprocal fashion, what we do then implants in our brains to make the memories upon which are based the next actions. That's true in religion. And so if we forget the moorings that we have, and we forget the foundation that it is on, then we are floating in space. We're creating something new. It may not all be bad, but it doesn't have the value base that we claim to have from the spiritual background. So that's where the whole idea of secularism, the church, and the way forward came. My young mentee became disillusioned with the encroaching secularism in the Protestant church and the feeling that we were losing the depth of spirituality and letting go of that depth in preference to a more capitalistic, a more individualistic, or I should say, a more egotistical and hedonistic approach to what religion can do for me, as over against what is spirituality in its largest sense, and how does that put me into a spiritual world where I both give and receive. So anyhow, that's how it all kind of comes about. The first couple of chapters in this book, we deal with spirituality as organized in America. It deals with Western religion only. And of course, that's a very, very broad spectrum in Western religion. But the Western church has moved from a very conservative base, by and large, both in Protestantism and Catholicism of the earlier years of our country, into a much more secular, business-oriented approach today. And so we decided that we would deal with that. And by doing so, we had to go back and look at the Reformation. What did the, if you will, founding fathers of the current Protestant church believe? And what we lost? Sometimes it's assumed that because the Reformation was new and all, that everything was wonderful. Well, we don't think so. We think we have lost a tremendous amount from the tradition of traditional Catholicism. And upon that is based chapter 3, which is based on symbols, ritual, and style. You see, dating back all the way again to Abraham, so much of what people believed was reminded to them daily by symbols. They had the feasts, they had the rituals of the temple, they had at that time the tabernacle, they had the shofar, which I personally love because I play trumpet, and just wrote a piece last week that's being published that uses a shofar. And the people listened to that call. It was kind of like a bugle call in that the shofar announced to the people what they should be doing. A certain call for action, there was a certain call for worship, there was a certain call for various activities. And so the Old Testament was one in which kept reminding the people in a wide variety of ways. And then we look to some of the more, shall we say, contemporary churches, and I'm not here to judge or to say they're wrong. That's not my purpose at all. But it is to tell you that I have a very different feeling when I walk into a shopping mall in which there is a room with no icons, no stained glass, no pulpit. There is no evidence of any sort that it's anything other than a meeting room. That gives me a very different feeling than it does when I walk into Westminster Abbey, or when I walk into the great, beautiful churches in our country, like Rockefeller Chapel, University of Chicago, or Riverside Church in New York, or the great Roman Catholic cathedrals around the country. The minute you walk in, you feel hushed. No one tells you to. But you look around and you realize you're in something that's been consecrated. It's been set aside as a holy place. It demands different thinking. It demands different action. And it changes you. You can't go in one of those places and come out the same person. And so Hudson and I in this book talk about that. That so many things in life are based on symbol. And symbol is so important because you see, everything is symbol, everything. If you see someone with a wedding ring, they don't have to tell you what that means. You see a steeple on a building, you know what that is. You see various things, objects, if you will, and know immediately what they represent. And as a result, symbolism then becomes important to us as an inner way of speaking to our psyche and to our deeper soul. It calls up memories from the deep, deep past. It calls up all kinds of knowledge that we have, quote, forgotten, and requires that we reconnect things, that we put things back together. And so I don't know, we ponder the question. Would I put back the same things spiritually if I walk into a room with folding chairs and no windows, as I would if I walk into a church with kneeling benches, beautiful stained glass windows, and an altar that calls me to be in a place other than where I was before I came in. And so that's the kind of thing we spent hours debating this back and forth. Because who are we to say that you can't worship in a room with no windows and folding chairs? Of course you can. Obviously you can. That's not the question. The question is, does it do the same thing? Does it accomplish the same purpose? And we think, right or wrong, that contemporary worship may be losing something. We agree that it may be gaining something, because it ties religion and spirituality into modern music, into modern language, modern behavior, theatrics, entertainment. We don't deny that. We're simply asking the question, does secularism interact in a way that is interfering with the deeper search of the soul to find itself and its meaning? And of course, with that, we go back into the models that we might look at as to why that's all happening. And so he said, it just kind of came naturally. And he said, well, how would you look at it? And I got to thinking, that's interesting. My background's in theology and psychology, but also medicine. Wonder how it'd be if we looked at the church from a medical model and kind of looked at it as kind of a illness model, if you will, a disease model. And we were to approach kind of a diagnostic approach on it. Well, if you're going to do that, then you look at diagnosis by function, what's going wrong, what's not working right. So what in the church is not working right? Well, of course, that begs definition of what is right. But if we're dealing with the search of the soul for spiritual meaning, then we have to ask, is the church functioning in a way that promotes a person finding the deepest sense of oneself and how one relates to others and the world around and to the God above? So, or do we diagnose by feeling? We say to a patient, I really don't see much wrong. How do you feel? And they say, well, I hurt. Oh, well, okay. Where do you hurt? How do you hurt? Is this a stabbing pain? Is this an ache? Is it a burn? Is it a lancinating pain? Can we establish a level of discomfort? So we look at the church and spirituality and we say, could we attempt to find out for ourselves and others, are we in a state of discomfort? Are we so much at peace that there's no hurt among us, and so forget it? Or are we hurting? Is there some way that the body is telling us that all is not right? Then we look maybe at diagnosis for outcome. We say, well, we ask you to do this physical exercise, to take this medicine, to eat this food or whatever. So the outcome is what? How are you doing? Well, doctor, I think I feel a little better. Well, that's good. I'm glad you're feeling better. Let me listen to your heart. Oh my goodness, you regular rhythm. It's sounding good. Stronger than it was last time I listened to you. Okay. Outcome's pretty good. So if we look at the church, see, I know it's kind of silly, but look at the church in a diagnostic sort of model. And you say, what are we feeling? What's the outcome? Is it working? Is it working? Well, then we have to ask questions. If it is working, now, of course, we were upset by COVID. That really messed us up because people couldn't go to church even if they wanted to. But back before COVID, the church was waning. I think everyone will admit that before COVID, church attendance was down, spirituality was down. All of the polls, whether it be the Gallup poll or the Pew poll or all the other polls that we have, they were all telling us that the church was having to struggle to maintain a life, and that attendance was going down and income was going down, churches were closing, and so on. And so there was no doubt at that point that the functioning was off center. So then we have to ask the question of ourselves in regard to diagnosing this illness. Is the church sick? Does the church have a disease? Does it have an illness? Is the church in trouble with itself? And I guess, to be honest, we agreed it does. We think it does. Because we think we don't see enough young people with children going to the church. We see the church, Protestant particularly, which is largely gray-haired people. And one of the serious problems is that they have built large churches. I live in Burlington, North Carolina, and we have at least 3 churches here that have a full city block. That's tons of bricks and mortar to take care of. And some of them have only a very few people going there anymore. When they are gone, what happens? The children are not there. The young people are not there. Then we look at some of the other organizations that are sometimes called the mega churches, and they're attracting a lot of people. They're doing an incredible job attracting people. But the question is, they are attracting people who live largely on credit cards. They're young people who don't own their homes. They're trying and struggling. They don't have a lot of money to give to the church as some of the previous generations did. Neither do they have the impetus, nor do they have the, if you will, familial demand that came from many of us that grew up in Christian homes as to what was the, quote, right thing to do and the right amount to give to the church and so on. And so as a result, the income is down in these places, but they're attracting a tremendous number of people and passing on what appears to be a good message. Now, later on, I'll discuss, though, we think some of that has a bit more to do with entertainment, but that's a judgment that's probably not fair. But anyway, so then we looked at various ways that we might look at the church. I had the privilege of studying with and teaching with Viktor Frankl. And Dr. Frankl, of course, was the epitome of the search for finding oneself, search for the soul, search for meaning. And if you look at what meaning is spiritually, it's not all the things that we're talking about. It's something that is deep inside oneself. And we have no way of measuring that except to see whether or not it is evidencing itself in society. Is the church having an effect in our community? In some ways, I'm sure it is. On the other hand, you don't have to go to church to be involved in a discussion as to how it seems we've lost civility. It seems our language is degraded. It seems as if we're not as kind to each other. It seems as if we have, in spite of talking about unity, done tons of things to continue to diversify and to separate and segregate. And as someone has rightly said, even the churches that are in operation are one of the most segregationist places in the world for 1 hour on Sunday morning. That we still have not really come to terms with all blood being red. So be that as it may, we look at the concept that Viktor Frankl would give as to what one is willing to pay, what price for spirituality. Now, of course, he went through the Holocaust. He could tell stories, but he didn't talk a lot about that. He talked more about how he personally worked to maintain his own sanity and his own spirituality. I have a little bit of a contact for that because you may know if you read this little book, and I didn't hold it up, probably should have. Here's what it looks like. It's published by Whip and Stock, and it's on Amazon and so on. And I talk in there about a family member. I had an uncle whose name was Billy Rositsky. And Uncle Billy married my Gentile aunt. Uncle Billy's family has been in the Holocaust. He would never talk about it. I learned good things from Uncle Billy, a good many things from Uncle Billy, even things he wouldn't talk about. But one of the things I learned from him is that spirituality does not come cheap. And the concept of cheap grace that some speak of, the Bonhoeffer particularly spoke of it as being cheap grace. The idea that we can get spirituality without sacrifice or spiritual without intentionality. And I like that word intentionality. It's different than attention. Paying attention is a generalized term. Intentionality is the specificity of right at the moment, being in the absolute minute, right at the second, and paying attention to what's going on. And spirituality doesn't come without attentionality. So we looked at Viktor Frankl and what that may mean for us as a role model one that we cannot come close to, but have tremendous admiration for. And then he said, or maybe it was me, I don't remember, or we could be a Don Quixote, in which you're delusional and you believe everything about yourself in spite of the truth. You're just not willing to admit. And so you go around thinking that you are a very wonderful spiritual person, when in truth, all you have is action. You have an external form of spirituality without having an internal substance of it. Of course, that's New Testament teaching too, isn't it? Phariseeism is over against real spirituality, the demonstration of something that is really kind of pseudo spirituality. So we dealt with Don Quixote as believing in oneself regardless of the truth, and also the ability to convince other people of your truth. For Don Quixote was a marvelous con man, and the story is worth looking at in the light of how one's personality integrates with one's, or does not integrate perhaps, with one's behavior. But then my mentee, being the bright young man that he is, just graduated from a school that has great respect, as I do, for John Wesley. So we looked at Wesley. Wesley's approach was very different. He was not an orator. He wasn't like a John Knox or some of the other great pulpit orators. He was really kind of a country salesman. And he rode around on a horse and was a circuit rider. Preached in a bunch of different churches all the time. And if you read his history, you won't even believe it, because he practiced everything from law to medicine as he went around with people. He actually did some medical things and gave legal advice. He didn't consider it that. He considered it being part of the ministry. But in his work, he always emphasized the importance of the personal reforming experience. Some call it conversion, call it what you may. But does there come a time in everyone's life when they face themselves in the mirror and decide whether or not they are who they say they are? Is there a time in all of our lives when we have to be personally reforming? Well, maybe, maybe not. I can't answer that for everyone. There certainly has been for me. But the concept being that John Wesley, in relation to the book we're writing, was that he was not concerned about the secularism of the day. He didn't pay too much attention to that. He's went about his work. Rode his horse, carried his satchel on the side with his medicines and his books, and preached the individual conversion message, and that persons had to be personally involved with their spirituality as over against organizationally. Well, that took us then, of course, to the whole concept of conversion. And not everyone has had, maybe does what I need to have, a conversion experience. Some, I guess, just grow up from the time they're tiny children in a certain belief system and pretty much stay in it throughout life. That isn't true for most people. Most people go through a process of childhood education and spirituality, if you will, then on through school, where we all get certain degrees of brainwashing, and we change our minds many, many times, but we don't necessarily change our beliefs. That's where people get mixed up. They think if they change their mind and say, I now believe this, that they do. That's not true. They act as if they do, but basic belief tends to go through cycles through our life. And then as we reach older life, and I know this living in a retirement community where people here are 75 to 100 or so years old, that as we get older in life, we come back to a much more stable childhood way of looking at things. Becomes less intellectual, much more internalized, much more centered on the importance of values. Things don't matter much anymore. We're not going to take anything with us. We've gone through life, as you all will as young people, collecting. And then our kids grow up and they leave home. Then we spend the rest of our life getting rid of. So we collect all these things, and then later we lose our, I say lose, and there's a sense in which it is, but we lose our house, we lose our car. I was just mentioning to Dr. Koenig that at 93, I have no friends my age. Most friends my age have Alzheimer's. Thank goodness I don't. But the fact is that I don't have friends my age. They're all gone. I've lost all my family except my kids and grandkids. I've lost all the furniture that I really loved. My gorgeous desk is gone. I no longer have many of the books that I held dear to my heart. Not only do I not need them anymore, I have the computer, but I'm silly that way. Books for me were kind of like pets. It's hard to get rid of my books. And so when we moved, I had to get rid of, my wife was a doctor also. She was clinical psychologist and a professor. She had 2 doctor's degrees. By the time she passed away and we needed to move into smaller quarters, we had to get rid of 6,000 books. That was like cutting off both my arms. And so we continue to lose and we lose and we lose. It forces you into a kind of spiritual insight that is unique. It forces you to look at what really, really matters. What really is important. And that which we consider as really God's gift of the most essential things in life, as over against the things that are wants, but not necessarily needs. And so we talked a little about that in the church. What the church wants and what the church needs may be 2 different things. The church may need an awakening. It may not want it, because to want it may be painful. It could be very painful, but it may need it. We looked at the next one in the light of that comment in what we call the health, wealth, religion. And this isn't to criticize or to judge the people that preach and have $1 million incomes and multi-$100,000 cars and automobiles. That's not for us to judge. But it is for us to ask, is the depth of spirituality the material that we hold? And the answer is absolutely not. Or is the purpose of the church to create a false sense of wealth that once they put you in the grave in ashes or in a big box you can't take with you? Is it true that the Bible is correct when it says our treasures are laid up in another place? Is that true? We have to believe it is. And so then our question in secularism today in the church is, are we allowing our children to understand as they go through life, what's the importance of things to collect and accumulate? What kinds of things should we be storing up in our soul, in our families, in our values, and built into the mission structures of our organizations? Then, of course, that led us to ask, are we losing that by some of the organizational structures we have? This thing's very critical. Forgive me if I'm being too too blunt on this, but I ask a question. If the church only feeds the poor and gives houses to the homeless, which we should, absolutely should, but if we only do that and nothing more, are we different than the Red Cross or anybody else that is a good humanitarian organization? And if we're not, would we be better financially and economically and organizationally just join hands and not support all these heated, air-conditioned brick and mortar places that we do? Nasty comment, nasty. But we have to ask, is there something deeper, better, and other that makes us different and allows us the right to pay money to keep structures rather than simply joining with someone that's already doing it pretty well? Just a question. We realize that's offensive to a lot of people, but we kind of thought that was important. We then got into the concept, if that's true, think back in history what people have paid to maintain spiritualism over against organization. You think of many of the martyrs that have gone before us. Have you ever heard of the book, Fox's Book of Martyrs? Famous book in which it points out that many people who have willingly been burned at stake, crucified, tortured, and all kinds of unspeakables for standing for the faith. And we here in America don't want to admit the fact that that's happening all over the world today, including Ukraine, right as we speak this moment. There are people standing for the faith and dying for it, while we have the privilege in a few minutes of going to a lunch in a very peaceful environment and not worrying about what anybody believes. It's really pretty serious. And I'm not sure we're passing that on as adequately as we might. I don't know what persecution is. I can't say I've ever been persecuted in any way. None. I've never been mistreated for my faith ever to my knowledge in my lifetime. But does that mean that I would be willing to if necessary? Would I be willing to sacrifice anything for my faith if necessary? Well, I don't know. It's an individual kind of thing we have to answer for each person for himself. But we then think that the really important thing is that we be willing to go back to the well. And I hung this on an interesting little episode. And interesting, I hadn't thought of this till right this minute, so excuse me while I stand up. Can you see this little cup? A story about that hangs in with this book. When I was a little boy, we lived in Decatur, Illinois. Very poor. We lived 3 houses from railroad tracks. Railroad tracks when I grew up. We were dirt poor, and that was okay. We didn't know it because everybody else around us was the same. But at the back of the lot was a well, and hanging on that well was a little aluminum cup, tin cup that I'm holding in my hand right now. And everybody drank from that well from this same cup. The hobos that came off the railroad, all of us drank from the same cup. So I said, you know, it's time to go back to the well. Go back and look at Abraham and see what he did. He built it with serious risk, faith, ambiguity, but behavior that was grounded in value, not secular success. Then we look at Jesus in the New Testament and telling the woman at the well, it's not the material, it's not even the many husbands, it's your spiritual self. Drink of my water. So that's what this book's about. I've probably talked too long. Are there any questions, or how should we finish this?
Donna, I know that you've got some questions.
Thank you. I so enjoyed your talk. It's wonderful. I wish I could introduce you to my dad. Maybe I can sometime. He's 93, going on 94, and he doesn't have Alzheimer's. And he, maybe we can make a club.
Okay, well, that'd be nice.
Yeah, and I think he's in a different spiritual place too. So I'd love to have you talk to him. But I really liked your connection of the well, Abraham's well, and Jesus meeting the woman at the well. I thought that was beautiful, and I'm really looking forward to reading your book. It sounds amazing, and I've recently retired. I've been trying to see, kind of what God wants to do with my life, and my husband also. And we've been reading the Bible every day since we retired. And we read Old Testament and New Testament every day, Psalms and Proverbs. And it's really amazing to see the two stories coming together, and how the Psalms are come together in the life of Jesus. And this is such an important week this week, because it is Holy Week, and it's also Passover. I was raised Jewish, and now I believe in Jesus as my Messiah. So to see the two stories come together, it's so amazing. And so I really do believe that it is one story, and God's promises are come in the Old and New Testament all come together. I'm not really asking a question, just, but I imagine that's what you're doing in your book, is that you're tying the Old and New Testament together through your conversations.
Yes, very much so. Well, thank you for your insight. That's totally true. And you see, the way this book developed, we did not intend to write a book. This is simply the recording of a dialogue, and the book's written in dialogue fashion, in which he poses a question or I pose a question, and then we discuss it. And there are no answers in this book. There are lots of questions, and there's lots of ways to approach what we're talking about. We're not attempting to give right or wrong. We did definitely on purpose want to give credence, however, to the Jewish history, because we think that Christendom today has not given proper credence and proper respect for that which everything we believe is based on. So we did want to do that on purpose. But thank you. Appreciate your words.
What at the age of 93 and a half do you think is the most important message for religion and health researchers? What should we be trying to study, trying to better understand? If anyone has a perspective on this, having lived almost a century, I suspect you might. Any thoughts, Richard?
Well, a couple of thoughts. One is that I think you're in a better position to say that than I am, because you have done so much wonderful research and study of it at a clinical nature. Mine is more experiential. So I have great respect for what you have personally done. I guess to put my 2 cents into it, though, it would be trying to understand, which people have not until probably this last many years, the reciprocal nature by which spirituality determines who we are as over against who we are determines other things. I don't think we paid much attention to how much what we believe changes the actual anatomical, neurological, and neurochemical structures of the being. I think the body in which we live is much more spiritual than we've been willing to admit. And I think the way in which spirituality actually has an effect upon on the neural structure, particularly in relation to neurotransmission. And I think we need to take a newer look. I don't know how to do it, but for instance, what is it that causes perhaps a neural chemical to cause one person to hate and another to love? Hate and love, we know a little about that in the brain, but not a lot. But we know they're extremely close together. And for instance, do we know enough about how the chemical structure works to recognize why a certain action comes from a certain belief, and how belief ties in with not only what we think, but as you know, Harold, as I do, that thought is not just ethereal, thought is neurochemical and neural structured. It's real. And we think of thinking as something that's abstract and ethereal that we can't pin down. But when the brain stops having neural circuitry, it stops thinking. And so I think that's the area we've got to get into, as to how, even in young children, we start them thinking in a way that promotes behavior.
Wow.
Rather than attempting to change behavior after it's already been imprinted, as the name's slipping me right now. Who was the guy that did the imprinting and inbraining in the brain? Piaget. Instead of trying to correct things after it happens, to get back like Piaget was and say we've got to imprint it in the right way so it gets printed out the right way in behavior. I don't know, Doctor.
Wow. That's phenomenal, Richard. That's phenomenal. Yes. You know, starting with children at a young age, somehow imprinting beliefs on them that will affect their behavior and their physiology for the rest of their life. You know, there is a book called "The Body Keeps the Score."
Yes.
Have you heard of that, Richard?
I have.
Yeah, and he talks about everything that we do, our beliefs, our attitudes, our behaviors, all are registered to some degree in our bodies, and it takes up some of the resilience that we have as we grow older. It can the negative things can use up some of that resilience. And gosh, these are incredible questions that potentially we could study these days, as we have these incredible brain scans and MRI scans and PET scans that look at the structure and the function of the brain and the different areas of the brain. And how does this all happen? How do you imprint a belief on someone then?
Well, see, this is one of the most amazing things to me. As you say, sitting here, it seems incredible, but it is true. Here I am sitting at almost 100 years. And looking back, I can remember when we did the first brain mapping. And that's not been too long ago. In my lifetime, we've learned how to map a brain. And from that, now we can do the magnetic imaging. We can do all kinds of special ways of actually looking at it. And I think one of the things is transforming our language to meet that. I'm not sure I can put it in real quick words, but in the laboratory, you see one cell doing something to another cell. We say, well, that's cellular behavior. Is that spiritual behavior? Is the cell capable? We're learning more and more about what cells know and do. We know they have memory. We know every cell in the body has memory. Well, where did memory come from? What is that memory? So are we calling things by the right names? When we say it's doing this, is it possible that it is expressing itself in what we call spirituality, but because we're not wanting to be religious, we'll call it anatomical? No, I'm being nasty at that, Harold. But you know what I'm saying.
Of course.
Um,
High-minded university people have to give things names to avoid the emotional meaning behind it.
We do indeed. Donna?
yeah, I have a question. I mean, I think, you know, the point that we're all spiritual beings. I think that medicine and that idea that we're spiritual beings inside these bodies for a temporary time until we transition out of them is something that, from me being a grandmother, little on up, you can teach a child that they're a spiritual being and belief in God. And we took our grandkids to the Ark. There's a replica of the Ark,
Mhm.
and there's something called the Creation Museum. I think it's in Kentucky. And they teach the kids right then and there, you're a created being, you know. And if you don't have that sense from little on up, and that's what I see is happening in the school system with kids, and even my kids, you know, in the public universities here in California, they're being brainwashed that they're not spiritual beings. The theory of Darwinism basically takes over, and you are an animal. So when you're an animal, and basically animals can do any behaviors without moral or spiritual problems. So kind of dealing with the idea that you're a spiritual being and that you were created and that God created us and that we're not just animals that evolved, that starts little on up. And if kids don't learn that little on up, that when you're trying to talk to people who've been in the education system told for years that they are just evolved as opposed to created spiritual beings, you know, that's like when the apostles went out and they had to talk to either people who were Greeks who had no idea of God versus like Peter, who got to talk to the Jews who had the idea of God and that they were spiritual beings. So I think when you're dealing with the church today, and when you were talking about these church becoming so much more secular, and we have all these mega churches, they will attract in secular people who want the rock and roll worship music and all that. But how do you instill in them the sense that, no, you're not a Darwin evolution thing, you are a created being? And that's really, I think it's really challenging. And me working with medical students, I mean, I recently just retired, but I'm a psychiatrist too, and working with residents, you know, the ones that have it, there's fewer and fewer doctors that you deal with that have a sense of any kind of sense of being spiritual beings. And when I've given talks on the importance of recognizing spirituality in patients and helping them with that, it seems like a foreign language to them.
Well, appreciate those words, Donna. Just so we don't get completely depressed by it all, there are a number of places around the country, including Dr. Koenig, that are giving a light at the end of the tunnel. And you're seeing, I think, an uprising in certain small segments, perhaps, and maybe the diversity or the terrible things that are happening in our world today may drive us more and more to a willingness to include spirituality in mental health. I think there are a number of places around the country. We don't have time to go into it right now, but I read about such places in which we do have some folks that are putting a light at the end of that tunnel and helping psychiatry residents and, for that matter, doctors of all sorts to begin to put the spiritual emphasis where it belongs. I think we're seeing more of that. Some medical schools are including a little bit more of that kind of thing.
Yeah. Leonard, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I have a comment just to Professor Dr. Ames. I have been invited to speak next Tuesday on precisely the issue that you are struggling with students. The whole issue of the relationship between the concept of spirituality and God. I'll be speaking on that. And also the whole thing, when I'm not doing psychiatry, I do paleontology and have worked with all the fossils here in South Africa, looking at the evolution of the brain, particularly the frontal lobe. So perhaps it will be interesting next Tuesday when I speak as a lecturer to medical students on the whole issue of spirituality and religion. And I'd love to hear your comments on what I have to say. That'll be fun.
I agree totally. I agree totally. We're out of time. We are out of time. We could go on, but Richard, I want to just thank you for a tremendous presentation. Your book just sounds fantastic. And the wisdom that you have conveyed, you know, even though we haven't had a lot of participants, this video will be on our website so that people, you know, throughout the world can take advantage of the wisdom that you shared today. So thank you, Richard, for who you are and all that you are doing at, you know, 93.5 years. So thank you all for participating. God bless you all. And next week we'll hear more from Leonard. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you. God bless. Bye.
Bye-bye.